The rain fell gently that morning, coating the dusty sidewalk in a thin sheen. It was the kind of day people hurried past, clutching coffee cups and umbrellas, barely noticing anything around them. But just beyond the bakery on Maple Street, tucked under the same rusty bench, sat the dog. Again, every morning for the past 3 years, he had waited at that exact spot. Head high, ears perked, eyes trained on the crosswalk. A silent sentinel. People had grown used to him. They left scraps of food. Some patted his head on their way to work. Others just stared for a moment before continuing with their day. But no one knew his name, and no one knew his story. The local kids called him Shadow. Not just because of his color, a deep, shadowy brown, but because he never moved from his post like he was bound to something no one else could see. The truth started 3 years ago on a summer morning when a man named Tom parked his old red truck just across the street. Tom wasn't anyone special to the world, but to Shadow, he was the whole universe. Tom rescued him from a ditch one winter, barely alive and shivering. He nursed him back to health with old blankets, chicken broth, and quiet kindness. Shadow never forgot. Wherever Tom went, Shadow followed. But that summer morning, everything changed. Tom got out of the truck and walked into the corner pharmacy. Shadow watched from the passenger seat. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Then 2. People came and went. The sun began to dip. But Tom never returned. An ambulance came quietly sometime in the afternoon. The flashing lights didn't scare Shadow, but something inside him sensed it. Something was wrong. Tom had suffered a massive stroke. He never made it out alive. No one came to get the dog. The pharmacy workers assumed he'd run off. Animal control never showed up. But Shadow didn't leave. Not that night. Not the next. Not even after the truck was towed away. He just waited. "He's still here," whispered Maria, the bakery owner, nearly a year later. Still waiting for Tom. Some tried to take him in. He wouldn't budge. One man even tried to force him into a van, but Shadow growled, something he never did. He wasn't dangerous. He was just loyal. Every day, he waited under that bench, facing the pharmacy. Winter froze his paws. Summer blistered the pavement. Rain soaked him to the bone. Yet he remained. Watching. Waiting. As if the world had made a mistake, and Tom would come walking out with a smile and a whistle like he used to. One morning, a little girl approached slowly, holding a scarf. "He's cold," she whispered to her father. Shadow didn't flinch as she gently draped the scarf around his neck. "He misses someone," she said softly, like she knew. By the 2nd year, he had become a legend. People took photos. Travelers asked about him. The bakery started leaving out bowls of fresh water. Someone even built a small doghouse beside the bench. But Shadow never used it. He preferred the open bench, the same view, the same hope. His fur began to gray around the muzzle. His eyes looked more tired. But he never lost that sharp, alert gaze every time someone exited the pharmacy. And then one snowy morning, something changed. A stranger stepped out of a taxi across the street. He was tall, wearing a navy coat, his hands stuffed into his pockets. He paused, glancing around like he was looking for something he'd lost long ago. Shadow stood. The first time in weeks. His tail wagged slightly. A low whine escaped his throat. Could it be? The man looked across the street and locked eyes with the old dog. He slowly crossed the road, kneeling down beside him. "Hey there, buddy," the man murmured, his voice rough. "You're still here, huh?" Shadow leaned forward, nose twitching. He sniffed the man's coat and whimpered. The man, Daniel, was Tom's son. He hadn't spoken to his father in years. A falling out no one liked to mention. He had come back only to settle paperwork. He never expected to find a dog waiting for a ghost. Maria stepped out of the bakery, wiping her hands on her apron. "He never left," she said, her voice catching. "Not once." Daniel knelt beside Shadow, heart breaking in silence. He pulled his phone out slowly, scrolling through photos. Found one of Tom. He held it out. "Do you remember him?" Shadow barked, a single soft bark, and rested his head on Daniel's knee. The street was quiet. Tears welled up in Daniel's eyes as he stroked the dog's fur. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have come sooner." Shadow just closed his eyes, leaning in, accepting not a replacement, but perhaps an answer. The wind picked up, and for the first time in years, Shadow didn't face the pharmacy. He faced Daniel. End of part 1. Continue upon request. Daniel returned the next morning. Not out of obligation, but something deeper. A stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Shadow was already waiting in the same place, but this time, his tail wagged when Daniel approached. Not wildly, just a soft, reserved flutter, like the heart of a dog still unsure if it was okay to hope again. Daniel crouched, resting a hand gently on Shadow's head. "You remember me, don't you? From when I was just a kid." Shadow blinked slowly. Daniel smiled. "He used to bring me here. You probably thought I was long gone too." The truth was, Daniel had distanced himself from his father after his mother passed. Anger, blame, grief. It had all twisted into years of silence. And yet, standing beside this dog who had waited every day for a man who would never return, something inside him cracked open. Daniel brought a blanket and some food that morning. Sat with Shadow under the bench. He didn't say much. Didn't need to. People noticed. Maria from the bakery brought out 2 muffins and handed Daniel a coffee. "You're staying?" she asked. He nodded. For a while. Later that afternoon, a boy approached with a sketch pad. "Can I draw him?" he asked. "He looks like he's part of the town." Daniel smiled. "He is." Each day passed slowly. Shadow and Daniel sat together, shared meals, watched the world go by. Daniel started talking, not just to Shadow, but to himself, to the memories he had locked away. "I was a brat back then," Daniel murmured one evening. Blamed him for things he couldn't control. Shadow lay beside him, head on his paw, ears flicking with the breeze. "I thought if I stayed away, I'd forget. But now I think. I just ran from the pain." A single tear slid down his cheek. He didn't brush it away. As the days stretched into weeks, Daniel began walking Shadow through town. Slowly at first. The dog's limbs had grown stiff from years of stillness. But bit by bit he loosened up. His gait steadied. His eyes brightened. Locals smiled when they saw them. "Looks like he's finally found someone again," said the mailman. Or maybe, Maria added one day, he helped someone else find their way back. Daniel started helping around the bakery. Fixed a broken shelf. Repainted the sign out front. It wasn't just about staying busy. It felt like building something, like redemption. He began visiting the cemetery too. One quiet afternoon, he brought Shadow along. They walked slowly to a simple stone tucked under an old maple tree. Tom's name was etched clearly in the polished granite. Daniel crouched. Shadow stood beside him. "Hey, Dad," Daniel whispered. "I'm sorry. For everything." He placed a single red carnation at the base of the headstone. "I met your friend. He never gave up on you. Not once." Shadow sat, perfectly still. Daniel chuckled softly. He waited. All these years. He waited, longer than I ever did. A breeze swept through the trees, rustling the leaves. They sat in silence. And then Daniel said the words he'd never thought he'd say again. "I miss you." That evening, something changed in Shadow. He climbed onto Daniel's lap, not beside, but fully like a tired pup, and rested there. Not in mourning. Not in waiting. In peace. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to feel what the dog had carried for years. Loyalty, love, and the aching sorrow of a bond cut too soon. The next morning, Shadow didn't take his place under the bench. He followed Daniel home. Maria gasped when she saw them walking down the street. "He's really going with you?" Daniel nodded. "He's done waiting. We both are." He didn't move far, just a few streets down to his father's old house, now his. But it felt like a lifetime away from the bench and the memories frozen in time. Daniel cleaned the house, room by room. Found boxes of old photographs, dusty books, a guitar missing 2 strings. Pieces of his father's quiet life. Pieces Daniel was ready to reclaim. Shadow explored every corner. He sniffed the couch, curled up on the rug where Tom used to read. And that night, when the fireplace crackled and Daniel sat with a journal in hand, Shadow rested at his feet like it had always been that way. Neither of them needed words. They had waited long enough. But one quiet morning, as dew clung to the window panes, Daniel awoke to find Shadow lying beside his bed. Still. Peaceful. Gone. Daniel fell to his knees. He buried his face in the soft fur and wept. Not just for the dog, but for the years lost, the wounds reopened, and the unexpected love that had stitched him back together. He buried Shadow under the old maple tree beside Tom, and carved a small stone. He waited. And he healed us both. End of part 2. Continue upon request. The town changed after Shadow's passing. People spoke his name with reverence. His story etched into the heart of Maple Street like the lines on an old photograph. Children pointed to the bench and whispered, "That's where Shadow waited." Travelers still stopped to ask. And Maria, with her warm smile and flower-dusted apron, always had a tale to share. Daniel didn't leave. Not anymore. He stayed in the house his father once loved, restored the garden, repaired the front porch, and adopted 2 rescue pups, not to replace Shadow, but to honor him. Every time he walked them past the bench, he paused. Not in grief. In gratitude. Shadow had waited for years, not just for Tom, but unknowingly for the return of a broken son. In that long silence beneath the sky, he bridged a wound that years of regret couldn't touch. Daniel often sat on the bench in the mornings, a cup of coffee in hand, just like his father once did. Sometimes someone would sit beside him and ask, "Did it really happen the way they say?" And he'd nod. "He never gave up," Daniel would say. "Not on his owner. Not on me." One spring, the town gathered to unveil a small statue beside the pharmacy. A life-sized bronze sculpture of Shadow, curled under the bench, eyes alert, forever watching. On the plaque, 4 words were etched. He waited. "We remember." Daniel gave a short speech that day. Voice steady. Heart full. We live in a world where loyalty is often overlooked and love sometimes fades with time. But this dog, he reminded us all that some bonds are too strong to be broken. That waiting, even when the world forgets, is a quiet kind of bravery. The crowd stood in silence. Then applause. Gentle. Earnest. The moral of Shadow's story wasn't just about a dog who waited. It was about the power of unwavering love. About how even in silence we can speak the loudest truths. And how sometimes healing doesn't come in noise or movement, but in stillness, in presence, and in the unspoken loyalty of those who never leave our side. Daniel visited the cemetery every week. 2 simple stones rested beneath the tree. One for Tom and now one for Shadow. He'd sit, breathe deeply, and say the same words every time. "Thank you for not giving up on him, and for not giving up on me." Years later, parents still brought their children to the statue, told them the story of the dog who waited. And every time they did, those little eyes widened, hearts softened, and perhaps, just perhaps, the world became a bit more kind. Because of a dog named Shadow. And a love that never left. / End of story. A complete conclusion with moral.